focus all week long, right, Eric?
Yeah, the in-between time is very fascinating. It doesn't, well, it is, see, it's different. We call it in-between time than the in-between time, um, because this sort of gives it an interesting kind of a name and a concept. And I want to go back for a minute and share a little story about what we might consider the in-between time. Excuse me. I remember clearly, you know how you have certain childhood memories that just stay with you. I remember clearly being in first grade, and my grandmother had recently died. And as was my usual pattern, instead of being totally enthralled and a part of what the teacher wanted us to be focused on, I was in my own thoughts. And my thoughts at that time had me imagining what it would be like to be dead. And all I could imagine of death was that they dug a deep hole in the ground, put you in a box, and buried you. And there you lied for eternity in the cold, dark box. And that just was not too exciting to me. So I remember getting home from school that day and asking my mother about what death was and telling her what I was thinking. And so she stopped what she was doing and told me a story I had not heard before. And she told me the story, which is in much more detail in the Reconnection. I know a lot of you are familiar with it, but in essence, she told me the story about how when she was giving birth to me, she died. She left her body, she rose up, and I'm listening to this story, fascinated by it. And she talked about the levels of beings that she passed through and consciousness and information she received, and how when she got to the top, she saw people she knew from not just this lifetime, but from multiple lifetimes, how she could look at people and see who they were, and they could see each other. And communication was, as we talk about here, completely nonverbal. Her words were that one look would convey volumes of information. She talked about the colors she had never seen, the flowers she had never seen, drifting down a lane without her feet moving, and being brought and presented to a light, a bright light. And she talked about the love, and she talked about the insights she gained about everything being love, about war being a temporary state we're going through, about all sorts of different fascinating understandings um, that she had, and then about her life being laid out before her and seeing everything that went on in her life and knowing it was a good life, and yet there was no judgment. And of course, that brought up a question: how do you know something's good without judgment? And that was an interesting discussion, and all the insights she had. And then she talked about being sent back, told it wasn't her time yet, and struggling to hold on to all the information and insights she had gained because she was programmed to forget them and was forgetting them on the way. And it's not the details of the story, which are very fascinating and they're very important to me. But the reason I'm sharing this with you now is because of how how hearing that story changed me. I no longer was under that kind of a fearful illusion of lying in a cold, dark box forever underground. I no longer had a fear of death. Now, don't get me wrong, you know, there's some aspects of dying that I might not like. You know, I certainly don't want a big, long, prolonged, painful death or anything like that. But death itself doesn't bother me. You know, it's kind of like they say, you know, the only thing worse than falling off of a 3-story building and dying is falling off and not dying. So, but anyway, it's funny how it disappeared, that concept, because what I realized without putting it into words is that there was no death. There's no such thing as death. And suddenly I became greatly aware of the importance of our role, of our lives, of every moment in life. Um, and suddenly there was no end. And that's an interesting concept too, because, if you look back at times, if you really study things about religion, but not of religion, you find that Christianity and Judaism at different points in time took out the concept of reincarnation from the Bible. And the proposed reasoning for that was they felt that the human powers in existence in religion, felt that if human beings were under the belief or the perception that they could do it again, they wouldn't feel so compelled to do it, shall we say, quote unquote, right, to live life well this first time. And also, they'd be more difficult to control the masses. Well, so the second theory, let's not address right now, but I will tell you the concept of realizing that we really do get to come back, be it in
Mm.
various ways or re-experience life in other ways, um, didn't have the effect of making me go, oh, well, I can do whatever I want now. I get to do it another time. It actually allowed me to realize, because my mother's understanding she was given was that there are old souls, there are new souls, and we go through our lifetimes in different ways of learning and having different experiences. And I found in recognizing that we were part of a much larger picture, that suddenly became more important how we live this life, not less. Now, it's not that everybody views it from that same perspective, but that was the experience, the insights, the truth, the light that she was given in her experience, like many, many, many people who have NDEs, near-death experiences, or as my mother called it, she said, when you have this, it's not a near-death experience, you died. So she called it what Raymond Moody referred to it as originally, which is a life after death experience. And I found that very, very, very powerful for me in my perspective.
Yeah. And it speaks into the topic today, because we have taken on the perception that a life after death experience is that in essence, the in-between time would be something in that um, near death moment and uh, the continuum. We want to propose this today, that what if in between was simply that we fully knew ourselves as consciousness, and it was understood in a way and accepted in a way that the in between was just the dash of our I am experiencing itself as the experience of I. So, just
Is that
by
like
way of an
is that like
example,
this lifetime being the in-between time?
correct,
Right.
that our lifetime as we are experiencing the I, as our I am is experiencing itself, as consciousness itself is experiencing itself through this divested, I'm going to say, divestment in its infinite perspective to this finite perspective. So think of it this way. I think this is a very contemplative example. The sun illuminates objects, yet the sun illuminates itself. So the sun self illuminates, but it is also what illuminates the very experience of the objects or experience itself. So in a deep sleep, the mind perhaps is divested of its limitation, right? Its thoughts, its feelings, its perceptions. Those are the mind's perspective. Those are the separate self or the I in this sort of separate self, and or what we may perceive as our single self. realm. So in this, it's the reality of pure awareness that we're seeking to contrast here. Pure awareness is shining as it is. And energy, light, and information in the reconnective healing expression is an it and an is. So we really want to explore this. I'm going to have Cease put up the second slide. We want you to take a snapshot of this so that you have, I'm going to say, the frame for the discussion today. So let's just read this or take a little snapshot of it. The duality is what separates truth into two parts of the same whole: the perceived relative truth and the inherent absolute truth. If something is perceived, the absolute truth cannot be understood. Absolute truth lies beyond the perception, because perception is only one filter that can be used to view something. So we're going to refer to absolute truth as I am, just because I don't think it's worth it to get into the conversation of what is a truth, what isn't a truth. We've been exploring,
True.
So just replace the words there in that way as we're going to kind of continue forward. But we want you to consider that things manifest out of an exchange with energy, light, and information, or the reconnective healing frequencies. But we, or I, the I self, the divested I, doesn't manifest them. That is a different engagement or an active experience of the separate self or the mind. That's what science studies. That's neuroscience. And science has studied and studied science and has only found so far the knowing of its beliefs. So we are making a very clear distinction here that in reconnective healing, there is no we, I, divested I that manifests mind to matter. That is, again, a different engagement. So
So
this
we
was
to come
something, yeah, this was something you were exploring, Eric.
right. So moving back, sorry, my notes are in one place because I do want to talk about things. A thought is not aware of anything. Only awareness is aware. And let's go back for a moment to the concept of as I believe it was, well, someone wrote in here and I saw it, is where we are now, is it death? And I don't think of it as death because death has a funny tone to it, but I do sort of compare this a little bit to being asleep and to waking up. Or that here's our limited thinking, a cognizant existence versus there where we are awareness, but there's still some thought that comes on. And I want to talk about that in a moment.
But we want to just do a quick on this cliffhanger.
Go ahead.
I just want to, we want to do a shout out to all of you joining us in a sneak peek on YouTube.
That's right.
Hoping to see you in the Reconnective Life Community, the RLC, soon. That's where we get really playful. So I hope you guys enjoyed the little sneak peek today. Cliffhanger, are we alive or are we dead?
Or are we Memorex? You know, you just never know. So, so when we think that things manifest out of reconnective healing, but the we, the I, the divested I is not what manifests them. We don't manifest them. That's a different engagement or an active experience of the separate mind. And Jillian's going to talk about that in a little bit. But what I wanted to share is this. So awareness is aware of itself. It isn't necessarily thinking, the thinking mind. When generally people speak about their life after death or their NDE experiences, they are an awareness, but they're also looking about, checking it out. There is some thinking going on. To me, I look at this time as when we become much more awareness to the point where we're learning. Learning's not the best word because learning requires a thinking mind, but maybe it is. Discovering and stepping into the release of the thinking mind to move on next to awareness. So might the NDE experience be in itself the lead in to the next step or the next place, as opposed to the be all end all of the next place? Again, these are
There's no next
discussion
place,
and
though.
thoughts. Well,
So the
let's say
thinking
the
mind.
next place of awareness or of cognizance in the thinking mind. It's very hard for me not to use the word awareness. So I'm learning not to say it the way we've been using it. That's why
True
sometimes
nature.
we talk of awareness, but there is the thinking mind, and that's what we are cognizant of, and perceptions and analysis. But if we step into awareness, these things sort of fall out of the way because they fall out of necessity, is my belief.
And that's a great point. So there isn't a necessity for the separate self to perceive itself. And can you just touch on that with respect to the reconnective healing frequencies?
But when we are experiencing reconnective healing, in line with NDE studies, because in NDE studies, you often find that strongly religious Christians tend to see Jesus. A lot of religious Jews tend to see Moses or someone else. In the Muslim religion, there are others that are seen and experienced. So a lot of that experience, I believe, the comfort zone comes from this all-knowing intelligence that is not of any one religion or belief or anything, yet knows how we are most receptive and open to feeling comfortable